Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from rock and roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded in St. Louis, Missouri, now here's your host, Aaron Perlett of Atomic Junk Shop.
Welcome back to the Loadout Music Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aaron Perlett. And whether it's on behalf of Dodge Trucks on the show Animal Kingdom, on behalf of Monster Energy, ESPN, in the video game Cyberpunk 2077, or just in the radio, you've probably heard the Cold Stares. They're out of Evansville, Indiana, and they've got a relatively new album out called The Southern that is pretty great. And today I'm joined by the band's guitarist and singer, Chris Tapp, which I guess is kind of like short for a Celtics center, Chris Tapp's Porzingis. I was thinking when anyways, that's my basketball nerdom. Anyways, Chris, thanks for joining the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm a Celtics fan as well, so I appreciate that. I'll take that.
Yeah, I'm just kind of an NBA hoops nerd outside of music. So yeah. I know that you guys are based in Evansville right now, which is ironic because I actually played my band played a show there not too long ago. In downtown, and I had never really spent a lot of time in Evansville, kind of driving through it. But you and you're the founding drummer are originally from Western Kentucky, correct?
Yeah. So Evansville, just across the river, maybe even 3 or 4 miles, is Henderson, Kentucky. My drummer grew up in Henderson, Kentucky, and then I grew up about 45 minutes south of here, Madisonville, Kentucky. Dixon, Kentucky area. So we both married ladies from Evansville and got drug across the Ohio into Indiana. So
is it uncomfortable for you to be in? Because I know between New York and New Jersey, people in New York will say, well, it's still fucking Jersey. Like there's something about that line, even though it might be within a couple miles. Is it strange for you being a natural born Kentuckian to now be living in Indiana?
It still is. And maybe more so that I feel like Kentucky's the weird one now. You know, as a kid growing up, I always thought Indiana was weird and Kentucky was normal. But now that I've been out of the state long enough, it's like, well, maybe we were a little peculiar, down there. But sometimes if you're in Arizona and you travel into Texas, if you're in Texas, you travel into California. There's a lot of places that you kind of cross the border. It doesn't seem like it's that big of a stretch. But even though it's a couple miles, Kentucky is much different than Indiana.
Yeah, they're culturally kind of two different planets.
They are.
Having spent a fair amount of time in both. Now, for many years, because you were founded, I think, in 2009, and until maybe 2-3 years ago, you and Brian were just a duo. So I'm curious about that because you guys have always had, since I've listened to you, a big sound. I mean, you guys play bangers and I love the resonator and I mean you can feel kind of that roots rock and blues heritage in your music. It just kind of gushes it. How were you able to, were you touring with other musicians, or were the two of you able to, when you played live, were you able to kind of bring that sound to the forefront before you even added a third person?
It was a nightmare as two people because I was trying to overcompensate with the amp thing. We kind of started around 2009, 2010. We were intent on not having a band. We had played in another band that got really close to some success prior to this one, and we thought we were asked to sit in with a friend of ours and did that, and I thought if we added a bass player, we were a legit band. So we were adamant about not doing that, just trying not to, be a band anymore, move on to other careers. But so the other thing that came as a byproduct of that is I didn't write songs that I cared if anybody liked. We had a couple shows that we had to do just to make some money with another friend, and I thought I'm just going to write the stuff that I like to play myself. And if it wasn't that light bulb moment didn't come until later that I went, oh crap, well, if I'd have just been writing songs for myself all along, we probably would have been more successful earlier. We were trying to write songs that we thought were needed to get a record deal. But yeah, so early on it was just two piece, and then we kind of took off. And the problem with that was even it was probably a month or two even after we played our first gig, we were coaxed into getting in a Hard Rock Cafe contest, Ambassadors of Rock thing in Nashville. And we had no intention or no forethought that we would win that. We ended up winning it. And then everybody was like, you guys are so badass because you're just two piece. You sound like three or four people, but you're just two piece. And that was our shtick for a while. Um, what it meant was I had to build a custom design guitar rig that would allow me. I had one octave, and this as a musician, so I was 440, and then I had another amp system that was an octave down, and then I had another amp system that was two octaves down that went through an Ampeg amp simulator out into a bass amp. And then I had a pedal switching thing that I was bringing the amps in and out. So if we think of like Highway to Hell, we got guitar and drums in the verse. We got a bass that comes in on the bridge or the chorus, and then we got a second guitar that comes on the chorus. And that's the way I was able to kind of do it live. But after 7 or 8 years of me hauling around 3 amps and everything, we had the gear of 5 people as two.
Yeah.
I got sick of that eventually, and it was constant Black Keys and White Stripes comparisons, and we felt we sounded more like Clutch or Black Sabbath than we did those bands. But because we were two people, I love both those bands. It was like after every interview after interview, it was like, why are you guys competing with those bands? I was like, no. So now we get the Government Mule and the Cream thing because we're a three piece.
You always got
But
to get something. I mean,
you do.
yeah, we get a lot of drive-by truckers, and every once in a while, a little Steve Earle or Tom Petty, which I'll take that any day of the week because it's
Love all three of those bands.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay, you want a comparison? That I feel you. So you are replicating. I mean, it's hard enough to do both the rhythm and lead on guitar, but then replicating that low end, that's man, that's what a bitch. That just sounds.
It was, but I think the good thing about it was it made me write and play in a certain style because I couldn't play leads. And if I played leads, I would have to hit the root note on one, and I'd have 2, 3, 4 to play a lead, and back at one.
Yeah.
The next measure to solidify whatever chord I was on. And it made me write riff rock stuff because I couldn't chord. If the bass rig was in, you couldn't chord. I could maybe do a power chord at the most, but so it kind of made a structure for a song where I could have chords in the verses. But then when we got to the chorus, it had to be a heavy riff, which kind of, drove a sound for us, and drove a way for me to write, which was great for the first 3 or 4 albums. But by the 4th or 5th album, I was kind of a punk rock kid. I didn't want to become Yngwie. I wanted to become, Mike Campbell was probably, speaking of Tom Petty, was kind of the top level. I wanted to be tasteful and write stuff like that, but I didn't want to shred. So I intentionally tried not to do that early on, which fit this band as well. But after 4 or 5 records, I'd been playing so much guitar that I was like, shit, I enjoy playing guitar. I want to play some solos,
Yeah.
And we started talking about either getting a bass player or organ player, and Bryce does both of those in our band now. So
Yeah,
it's fun now.
Ray Wiley Hubbard, a lot of times when he wants to travel light, they'll actually put a bass pad. The drummer has a bass pad up on it. So he'll travel as a threesome sometimes with him and his son and their drummer. But that's fascinating because I remember talking to Cody Canada about this, and he's playing both lead and rhythm now, and he's thrilled about it because I think it's more about managing the chemistry. As a band grows, you got to manage more chemistry, and I think he'd rather have that burden on him, but he's not dealing with bass, but at least having that burden of both guitar parts, than he would manage a larger band.
It makes you keep it simple. It makes you stay focused on the song. We jam a little bit now, which is fun, but it's still song based and keeps you from going too far out of the deep end.
So one thing I'm pretty amazed at, like I gotta say, I really it's fun kind of going through your catalog. Um, you have just so many kind of blues-driven bangers throughout your catalog, and I mean, you talked about being kind of a punk rock kid. Uh, it's just kind of this deep, heavy blues that kind of like, you're just nodding your head and just kind of it's thumping behind you. But uh, a lot of artists have found they've been able to kind of become almost resurrected to their career by getting into commercial television. You guys have had, I mentioned it at the outset, but I mean, you've had a handful of tunes that have made it, as I said, to, different products, video games, what have you. How does that happen? Do you think it's that you guys have a certain vibe that it fits an aura that helps with certain brands, or what is it? It's pretty unique.
Yeah, man, we've been super blessed with that. And I don't know, I think it's like anything. It's like to get a record deal, you got to have a record deal to get, it's like once we got the first sync thing, I think it really helped with some other things. Without being too self-absorbed, the one thing that's kind of been the common denominator with some of those things were that they said that they wanted something in the blues rock realm, but they wanted something that was a little different. I think we kind of carved out a little niche of our own thing of being a little bit 70s Sabbath or Zeppelin, and then a little bit of some things that were familiar to people that grew up in the 90s, maybe. Um, and so we just kind of lucked into those things. The first one came, I think the first one we got was Animal Kingdom. Um, and then they just kind of came after that. But you put in for 1,000 of them. My publisher sends me something every day or a couple times a week where we're always looking. And sometimes it's, hey, we want something that's kind of, in our realm, and you put in for it. And there's been a bunch of close ones that we almost had that I just would have died to have, that we didn't get. And then there's
That
been,
one lingerie ad. I mean, she would have.
yeah, yeah. Well, we had a couple whiskey ones that I thought, oh, we'd get this for sure, and we didn't. So that, you never know what's in the cards. But we've also had a few that I've turned down just because I didn't want the music associated with whatever the scene was going to be. A lot of times they'll tell you the scene or tell you what the platform is, and it's hard when you know how it is being a musician. It's hard to turn things down when you got bills to pay and you're trying to
Yeah.
apply a blue collar work ethic to playing music, but sometimes you have to turn that down.
Well, so let me ask you, that's a really interesting thing. Have you ever, in anything you've turned down, has it been a show that you liked the show, but you just didn't like the scene, or were you just uncomfortable with the entire product overall that your song would have then been representative of?
I wouldn't mind our song. I mean, I'm if it was a toilet paper commercial, I'm not so, I don't care. I would have probably done that. The last one that I turned down was a new television show that specifically had a scene in it uh, that was some religion based stuff that was just kind of sideways. Um, and I feel very lucky and blessed to have a lot of these things. I don't want to put any bad mojo in choosing to do something that doesn't represent who I am. It was just kind of an ugly scene, and to be honest, with the scene being the way it was, I would assume this show was kind of predicated on that stuff. There's some pretty wild stuff. I have a 17-year-old. I don't want to put my music in something that I don't want him to see.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. You bring up a really interesting topic. I've talked with BJ Barham of American Aquarium about this. Uh, because some people have tried to kind of put him in this kind of shut up and sing box. And I know that like I've got a song that I wrote about it's called Stuck in the Middle. It's about kind of being a man without a party, being just
yeah,
you feel politically I'm very centered, and I don't feel like I fit anywhere anymore. And I mean
I'm the exact way, same way.
well, I'm very cautious to even play it in certain venues. Like I think about it when I'm putting the set list together because you just never know if someone's gonna if that's gonna upset someone that you're saying God forbid I like the idea of moderation and compromise. But
Yeah.
do you as an artist Do you think about that much in terms of like when you're writing songs, topics you do or do not want to touch even because of this climate we're living in today artistically and culturally?
I've been very fortunate that throughout our career I've written stuff that touched on how I feel about religion and some other things. But I've been very lucky that people have always said, "Hey man, I like the way that you approach that because I don't feel like you're beating down my neck on it. You just kind of your point." And I enjoy listening to conversations about a variety of topics that I'm not interested in whenever I hear somebody speaking from an honest place. And so I like that when that comes to me that direction. But it used to be that we all knew the topics that we shouldn't be talking about.
Yeah.
And I just feel like we've gotten to a point now where it's like, yeah, I probably will have an argument with somebody about certain things because when did it become like some of these topics, when did they become taboo? Is it like it's just common sense, some of this stuff? But I have friends on both sides of the aisle. And I respect everybody's opinion on everything, especially things that's important to them. I don't want it run down my throat, so I try not to run it down anybody else's throat. But we have a song on the new record, "Looking for a Fight," and I wrote it just as a political year song that you can't have an opinion in any conversation that doesn't start some kind of fight. It shouldn't be political. Some of these topics shouldn't even be centered from a religion. It's just a human topic. If we can't talk about our kids or we can't talk about how we feel about certain things without starting a fight, it's frustrating to me. So um, I'm carrying the blue collar flag. I feel like if we're gonna argue about something, that's the one thing um, that I'm not going to back down on as the working man. And I came from humble beginnings. My dad owned automotive stores when I was growing up. I come from a part of Kentucky where there was a lot of coal miners and a lot of people that worked their ass off to feed their family. So I try to stay out of a lot of things, but if it comes down to that, I have a hard time keeping my mouth shut. So
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, Appalachia has kind of had its a moment the last decade. I think arguably more so than any other time, whether it's, Sturgill or Tyler or bands like you guys, uh, even I mean, Wheeler Walker Jr. Has
yeah,
has built an audience for himself. It's very hard for him to do so because of the topics he sings about. Uh, but I mean, I think it's been nice that over the last decade, there's been this because there was a forum for Appalachian stories, I think, in like maybe the late 60s, early 70s, but there seemed to be a real lack of that for a long time. And then the last decade, there seems to be like this new flurry of stories and art coming out of Appalachia, which I think is a great thing.
yeah, I do too. And I was born in Corbin, Kentucky, in Eastern Kentucky, and then raised in Western Kentucky, and they're very different. And that
Right.
was part of the thing about this record, The Southern, was I heard a lot of people, Jason Isbell, Tyler, some of these guys that were kind of, especially during lockdowns and COVID stuff, that were kind of communicating. I think I felt like that they were speaking for the mass of Kentucky at a lot of times, or the mass of the South a lot of times. And um, some of those things I completely agreed in, and some of them I was like, well, that wasn't my experience living in Kentucky at all, And I don't think I think we got too many people speaking for the majority of ourselves instead of being I'm great with there being a lot of minorities of thought from different regions of the country. I don't want to speak for all people of Texas. I don't want to speak for all people of California, and I don't want somebody else speaking for how life is in Kentucky when I spent my whole life there.
Yeah, the Drive-By Truckers have that great song, The Three Great Alabama Icons, where Patterson Hood he goes to great length to talk about kind of the Southern thing and how it can be misunderstood, and
Yeah.
that to a degree, Skinner was very misunderstood, trying to just simply share their experiences. Um, but it's funny, like I grew up in Virginia, middle of the country. Um, and I've kind of often lived in the middle of the country, and terms of north south, and it fascinates me the preconceived notions that both northerners have about southerners and southerners have about northerners, and they're both often very wrong.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And to be honest, a lot of times, I've said this before, a lot of times Kentucky and Tennessee feels more southern these days than Alabama does, or some of the other areas. You have an influx of a lot of wealth into northern Florida and some of the southern states, and it doesn't really feel, there's not the traditional southern vibes of family and cooking and just some of the other things I feel like in Kentucky and Tennessee. And I'm guilty of stereotyping some things too, because my conception, or my preconception of what like New York was is drastically changed since we've been touring up there. What I found is New York is kind of the way I thought it was, but when we're in upstate New York, it's just like Kentucky. It's farms, people kind of run around at a slower pace, and a lot of the Northeast that's more rural feels just like the areas that
Yeah,
I grew up in. So I
totally
don't
agree.
think I think in the US it's not so much a difference of the north, the south, the east, the west. It's more rural, or it's more industrial, city. And it's just different mentality and a different way of living between the two. I think it'd be great for everybody to spend a little time in each one and have a little bit more respect for and feeling for what we have, different ways of living.
Yeah, and I also think there's a lot of comparatives or comparables between socioeconomics, whether you're talking about poor folks in rural areas or in urban areas, or wealthy people in rural or urban areas. Um, those socioeconomics tend to create very similar experiences for folks, whether it's access to education, healthcare, things like that, just being able to buy food, put food on the table. Um, and so you find a lot more similarities than you do differences, uh, just based on your means and things like that. Yeah,
Absolutely.
but I agree with you in that I spent a lot of time in rural areas in the North, in the Midwest, in the South, and it's all very similar. It's just kind of a different kind of relationship with the land than folks have in big cities and things like that. But anyways, we're not here to talk about this. We're here to talk about I believe it's your seventh studio album, and you've also got 5 or 6 EPs as well. But the Southern came out earlier this year. This is I mean, from end to end, this is a really great rock and roll record. I mean, I was really impressed. To talk about this record and what you guys were trying to do going into it.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much. We had done so much with the other records, especially sonically, the way that we recorded stuff. We wanted to do this one a little bit different. We went in October of last year, and I had, I think, 12 songs written. And we were trying to do an homage of, from a writing perspective, really thinking about the people that influenced me that I would consider Southern. Growing up, where we set in with bands when we were 13 and 14 years old, because there wasn't another guitar player or drummer that was either available or wasn't having a spat with their wife, or drug addiction. It wasn't a big pool of musicians to draw from. But whenever we were playing, the Moose Lodge or the Elks or wherever, sitting with those bands, we were having to do Skinnerd and Bob Seger and some of that stuff, and I learned to love that stuff. But we also played Robin Trower, we played AC/DC, we played, whatever. Um, so it was, I think, writing this record, I wanted to set the mode that just because I grew up in the South doesn't mean we only listen to Skinnerd. There's some moments on the album that I wanted it to be a little Allman Brothers and Skinnerd, Horse to Water, a couple of those songs. Um, but those weren't all our influences. So I was kind of thinking, well, I want this record to be called The Southern, and go into it thinking, okay, this is kind of a Southern vibe, but to show the influences that we had growing up in what we would consider the South, and what we heard. But we rehearsed the heck out of it, like we always do before we go in. So we try to keep the studio time limited. We did 12 songs in a day in October, and then we came back and we had the record done. And you know how this is. I had no control over writing. I came home and sat down, and I should have just been watching kung fu movies with my kid, or going out to dinner with my wife, and I was just writing. I couldn't stop writing. And I wrote another 10 songs, and I called the guys. I was like, hey, you guys want to run back down to Memphis in December? Because I got a bunch more songs. We'll have them, you know. So we went down there and did that, and we ended up having 22 songs. So we let the record company, that Mascot, pull 11 of them for this record. And then we have another record, the Southern Part 2, that will come out late spring of next year, that was recorded, 2 months later, and we did it all in one day as well in Memphis.
So yeah, I want to go back to this one day thing because I don't know what you're smoking, but man, like we went in, we did 10 songs and I think 4 or 5 days, and I was pleased with that. But were you recording them? I'm assuming you had to do that many songs, you had to be recording them live, correct?
Yeah, we just cut everything live on the floor. The thing is,
Okay.
it's a little misleading, because what we cut everything live on the floor, then we come back, and I come back to my home and I do all the vocals at my home. I have a studio here at the
Okay.
house, and then I'll do guitar overdubs and stuff there. So the basic rhythm tracks we cut in one day. We make sure we're prepped and we're feeling good. And to be honest, if we went in there on a Wednesday and we had prepared to record everything on a Wednesday and it wasn't feeling right, we'd stay Thursday. We've just been lucky lately that we were all feeling good. We went in there and
Yeah.
knocked him out. But my drummer is an over preparer. My bass player kind of rides the middle between him, my drummer, and myself. I want to prepare, but not prepare so much that if something cool comes out, I shun it, you know. Uh, but yeah, we knock them out pretty quick. Once we're in there, we would go in on a Wednesday night, we'd get sounds, get everything plugged up, and then Thursday morning come in at 10 o'clock, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we had everything done. The good thing about recorded vocals is at home is that's the one thing in the studio down there. If I was having a day, but my voice was tired or ragged, at home, I can wait till the house is quiet, wait till a day that I feel good, and go down there and sing a couple songs, give myself a couple weeks to knock it out. That helps.
Yeah. Yeah, when I listen to the record, I don't hear any, to your point earlier, I don't hear any one thing. I mean, I hear, I mentioned the resonator, which gave me the kind of the Delta blues influence. I could hear, and that was on maybe like Mortality Blues, and maybe like Fuzz Pedal on Looking for a Fight. I mean, I heard I heard a variety of, you know, whatever this roots music thing is that you guys play. I know we play it as well. That draws from, the heritage of American and really British music too.
Yeah.
Blues, rock and roll, country. That brings it. That's kind of what I was feeling as I listened to that. But in a real uh heavy way, and I say that in the most glowing of terms.
Yeah. 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 That's us in a nutshell, and I have somewhat of a formula. I'd like to, we branched out a little bit with this one, but I like to write songs that have somewhat of a story to them. They have a visual in my mind. Usually any song that I have is a small movie in my head. So I like the lyrics to kind of have something. Um, and then it's always going to be somewhat of a blues aspect to our music, but I also love country and bluegrass, and I love a lot of root stuff in early American music. And as you said, British stuff, which kind of bounce from here to there and back in a good way. So all those influences come in there, but then we are also kids of the 90s. And so there's always a touch of Soundgarden or a touch of, something from the 90s that pops in there as well. It's always funny. Sometimes you finish a record and you hear a song as a songwriter, or somebody in the band, you think it sounds like something, and then somebody else will come back and go, "Oh, dude, that sounds just like that's an Iron Maiden riff." It's like, well, I wasn't listening to Maiden at all. I don't know where that comes from. There's sometimes, like with Mortality Blues, I can guarantee you I'm getting across exactly where I want it to come from and sound like. and that's kind of ground floor for me. But some of the stuff with the rock stuff, I just kind of let it go where it goes and let the influences just kind of come out as they will.
Right on. So what's the rest of the year look like for you guys? I know you said you have the Southern Part 2's coming out next spring. What does the next 6-8 months look like for the Cold Stairs?
Yeah, a lot more touring. We got a lot of cool festivals coming up. We're doing another cruise with Joe Bonamassa to Alaska. Cool lineup with that. Marcus King and Grace Potter, and some festivals and some more runs overseas for next year. Just touring. We're taking December off to spend time with families, and we'll do another record. So the Southern Part 2 will come out in the spring. We'll have another album that will come out later in the year. So the goal is 2 albums a year. And then I've got a side project that's an acoustic album that I've been working on that will come out probably early spring. But I was a big fan of Peter Green. We got lucky when we were touring in England last year that we were in London when the Peter Green auction closed. And I had sold off a couple things. I was trying to watch, and I got lucky and got a couple Peter Green guitars. One of them is an old National resonator. So I got it home and I was writing with it again, just kind of uncontrollably because it sounded good and it felt good. And then I didn't want to do a Peter Green record because Gary Moore, so many other guys have done that, and that's not kind of who I am. But I thought, well, this is a really cool guitar that has more songs in it. So I've written and recorded. I'm almost finished. Written and recorded just with that guitar, an album of just that guitar and vocals, just one microphone, and it's called Green, and I'm super stoked with it. So that'll be a solo record with that as well. So between touring, trying to have 2 records a year and then probably 1 solo record a year.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of people do not realize how good some of the early Fleetwood Mac was when Peter Green was still kind of driving the train on that. They became a very different band as he started to phase out in the early 70s. And it's funny, Tony Joe White's family has been auctioning off some of his stuff, and they had a guitar there. It was a Gibson, I forget what kind they were auctioning off, and I love Tony Joe White. I was so tempted to try to bid on it. I'm like, you know what? My wife is going to absolutely divorce me if I buy this guitar. So I'm not even going there. But I feel you. I can't blame you for going after that resonator. That's nice.
I love Tony as well. We have a lot of the same loves. I got really lucky at the auction because there was 2 resonators, and they were right beside each other, and one of them was a 34 or a 36. It was a really early one, and I think the projected sales on it was ridiculous, but everybody was watching that one, and they closed right after each other. So the one went very high, and as soon as it went, then I had like 6 seconds left on my auction, and it was just Providence. I got really lucky on it, and I got it at a really great price. So I was stoked.
Providence indeed. Chris Tapp from the Cold Stairs. The newest album is the Southern. You've got the Southern 2 coming out. So thank you so much for spending time with us today on the Loadout Music Podcast. It's been a real privilege to have you on, man.
Awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much. Great to meet you and great to be a part of the show.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, hosted by Atomic Junkshot frontman Aaron Perlett. Find all of our episodes and more at loadoutmusic.com.